The producer's exact words were, "Don't do the slide thing." It was March 25th, 1983, and Lawrence Holt had been producing television for NBC for 19 years. The Motown 25 anniversary special was not an experimental show. It was a celebration, a chance for people who had grown up with Motown to sit in front of their televisions and remember something good. The audience at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium was full of people who had bought those original 45s, who had danced to those songs at their high school proms, who associated this music with a specific feeling from a specific time in their lives. Michael Jackson was 24 years old. Thriller had been out for 4 months. It was selling, yes, but nobody yet understood what it was about to become. To Lawrence Holt, Michael was still a Motown kid, one of Joe Jackson's boys, talented certainly, but this was not his night. "The people who bought tickets tonight," Holt said, standing in the corridor backstage, clipboard against his chest, "they're here for the Supremes. They're here for Marvin Gaye. They're here for what this music meant to them. You do your medley, you take your bow, and you let the evening breathe. That's all I'm asking." Michael was quiet. He had been quiet for most of the day. He had his white sequined glove on his left hand, which Holt found a bit much, but the glove was manageable. What concerned Holt was the other thing, the footwork Michael had been doing during the afternoon rehearsal. That backward sliding movement. It looked like a trick. It looked like something belonging in a variety show, not in an anniversary tribute to one of the most important labels in American music history. "I understand," Michael said. That was all. He looked at the floor for a moment, then walked back toward his dressing room. Holt watched him go and felt satisfied. The evening was under control. He was wrong about that. To understand why that night mattered, you have to understand what Fred Astaire meant to the world Lawrence Holt came from. Fred Astaire had been making films since 1933. 50 years of working at a standard that left almost no room for criticism, because criticism requires finding something wrong, and wrong things were genuinely difficult to locate. He did not just perform, he constructed. Every sequence was architecturally precise, technically immaculate, and somehow completely effortless in appearance, making that much work look like it cost nothing. His films with Ginger Rogers had produced something that people in the 1930s genuinely needed. People watched him move across a marble floor in white tie and tails, and felt, for a couple of hours, that beauty had not been entirely suspended from the world. By 1983, Astaire was 83 years old and still sharp in the way people who have spent a lifetime paying close attention tend to stay sharp. He was functionally the standard that serious people in that world still measured against. When Holt told Michael not to do the slide thing, he was applying a framework. He had a sense of what the evening was supposed to be, where a performer like Michael Jackson fit in the context of a tribute to an era he had come from but not yet transcended. The framework was reasonable as far as it went. The problem with frameworks is that they are built entirely from what has already happened. Michael had been rehearsing the moonwalk for months, not the concept of it. The movement had existed in various forms for decades, in James Brown's footwork, in the street dancing that Jeffrey Daniel had shown him, in old sequences Michael had studied since childhood. But the specific quality of controlled floating he had worked through hundreds of repetitions to achieve was something he had not yet shown to a television audience of that scale. He knew what it did to people when they saw it for the first time. He had watched their faces in rehearsal rooms, that pause before the applause, that fraction of a second when the brain encounters something it cannot categorize. He had practiced it on a hotel room carpet at midnight, on tile floors, understanding exactly how much the surface beneath him mattered. His certainty about it was not loud. It did not argue with producers in backstage corridors. It simply waited for the right stage and the right song. The Pasadena Civic Auditorium held roughly 3,000 people that night. By the time Michael came on, the evening had already been running for a while. People had been moved, had applauded, had felt the warmth that comes from collective memory doing what it is supposed to do. The opening bass line of Billie Jean hit the speakers. That sound changed the temperature in the room. Not because the song was unfamiliar, it had been in heavy rotation for months, but because there is a difference between hearing something through car speakers and feeling it come through a sound system where 3,000 people simultaneously decide to pay attention. Michael began moving. For the first 2 minutes, what was happening was extraordinary but not unprecedented. The precision of every gesture, the way he used stillness as a counterweight to movement, the ease with which he occupied the full width of the stage. People who had seen him before were watching with the pleasure of confirmation. People encountering him at that scale for the first time were quietly revising something in their understanding of what a performance could be. Then came the bridge. He planted his right foot. His left foot began to slide. There is no clean way to describe the moonwalk to someone reading about it rather than watching it, except to say this: the human eye carries an expectation, built over a lifetime, that the direction a foot pushes and the direction a body travels will correspond. When that correspondence is inverted, the brain does not immediately accept what the eye is sending it. There is a lag, a fraction of a second of genuine, unresolvable confusion. That lag is what Michael had been building for months. In the fraction of a second before 3,000 people understood what they were seeing, the auditorium made a sound, not applause. Applause comes after understanding. This was the sound that comes before it, the involuntary noise of a large group of nervous systems encountering something they were not equipped to process. Then came the applause, fast and loud and sustained. Lawrence Holt was standing in the wings. He watched the audience. He watched Michael complete the performance, take the microphone, say a few words, and walk off. Holt stood in the wings for a moment after Michael passed him. He did not say anything. He looked at the empty stage, then at the audience still making noise. 70 miles away in Beverly Hills, Fred Astaire was in his chair watching the NBC broadcast. He watched performance the way surgeons watch footage of surgeries, with an attention so habitual it had become effortless. He noticed what dancers did with the space between notes, which he had always believed was where the real decisions happened. He noticed the difference between a performer who was executing and one who was actually present. When Michael began Billie Jean, Astaire leaned forward slightly. He watched the footwork. He watched how the stage seemed to contract under Michael's use of it. He watched the glove catch the light on the first spin. He watched the moonwalk. When the performance ended and the applause was coming through his television speaker, Astaire sat back. He stayed still for a moment, looking at the screen. Then he reached for the telephone on the table beside his chair. He left a message that night. Michael received it the following morning and called back. The conversation lasted several minutes. Astaire was direct in the way people who have spent 80 years saying exactly what they mean tend to be direct. He told Michael that what he had done the previous night was something he had not expected to see. Not flattery, an honest statement from someone who had spent most of his life around people who move for a living and had developed a precise sense of what was ordinary and what was not. He said Michael was an incredible mover. He used the word extraordinary. He asked how long Michael had been working on the footwork in the Billie Jean sequence. Michael told him, the months, the mirrors, the hotel room floors. Astaire listened. Then he said something that Michael returned to repeatedly in the years that followed. He said the difference between a performer who is technically accomplished and one who actually changes something in an audience has nothing to do with the difficulty of the execution. It has to do with whether the movement is carrying something real. You can see immediately when it is absent, Astaire said, and you feel it below the chest when it is there. Michael did not speak for a moment. They met several times after that conversation. People around Michael in those months described something different in how he talked about his own work. Less interested in explaining his choices, more certain of them. Astaire died on June 22, 1987. He was 88. Michael went to the private memorial and said nothing to the press afterward. What he told the people closest to him was simpler than any public statement. He said that Astaire had been one of the very few people who watched him perform and responded not with excitement or commercial interest, but with plain, precise recognition. You spend a career working towards something specific, and almost everyone who responds to it responds to something adjacent. The fame, the sales, the cultural size of the moment. Astaire had responded to the thing itself. That was what the phone call meant. Lawrence Holt retired from NBC in 1991. In a trade publication interview from 1994, he spoke about his career highlights. Several productions were mentioned. He did not bring up Motown 25 on his own. The interviewer raised it, asked him what it was like to be in the building the night Michael Jackson debuted the moonwalk on national television. There was a pause. I was there, Holt said. He did not add anything. Those 3 words were not a boast. They were something closer to a reckoning. The kind that comes from a man who had told the person doing the thing not to do it, who had then stood in the wings and watched it happen anyway, and understood in real time that the framework he had been applying was not wrong, only insufficient. Frameworks are built from what has already occurred. They cannot tell you what a 24-year-old is about to do when he plants his right foot on a stage in Pasadena and lets his left foot go where it has been rehearsing to go for the better part of a year. Fred Astaire understood this because he had spent his career building frameworks and then watching them become inadequate when something genuinely new appeared. He had been that new thing himself once, and he knew what it looked like from both sides. On a Tuesday night in March 1983, he watched it again from his chair in Beverly Hills. When it was over, he reached for the phone because he believed, and had always believed, that when you see something true, the correct response is to say so. That kind of recognition is rarer than talent. It requires someone who cares more about the work itself than about who holds the authority to define it. The slide thing, the trick, the gimmick Lawrence Holt had warned him against. It is still the first thing people think of when they hear the opening bass line of Billie Jean, the single most recognizable piece of choreography in the history of popular music. Frameworks only hold until someone shows you what they were missing. The person who has spent the longest time understanding something will always be the first to recognize when someone else understands it better. Has anyone ever told you not to do the thing that turned out to be exactly the right thing? Drop it in the comments.